Welcome back to Combat Mission Shock Force 2, where we're going to be playing the Al Hall scenario as the Dutch army from the NATO module. The Blue Force in the original scenario is a striker infantry company backed up by an F-16, and I swapped that force out for a Dutch mechanised company supported by an A-10 Thunderbolt. On paper, this Dutch force has more combat power than the American one it's replacing. It's worth about 1,000 points more in the force selector, but given the situation, the terrain and the enemy forces in this scenario, the striker infantry might actually have an easier time, and an F-16 with 4 1,000-pound laser-guided bombs is either better than or on par with the lightly armed A-10 that I replaced it with. Your mileage may vary. If you want to play it, there's a link to the scenario in the description. It should work fine against a human opponent, and if you play it as the blue side in the single player, but if you play as the Syrians, then the Dutch will sit there and do nothing because I haven't updated the AI plan. Obviously, if you want to avoid spoilers, stop watching this, download the file, play the scenario, and then you can come back and see how I tackled it. Now that that's out of the way, what are we dealing with here? This is a meeting engagement. My forces are coming in from one side of the map, and the Syrians are coming in from the other. I've got 3 objectives to secure in the town of Al Hall, the western town, the residential area, and the south farm. And of course, I'm going to get points for destroying the enemy. This is where this scenario starts getting interesting. The enemy force here is from the Republican Guard, so they are the tier of the Syrian army that gets the most modern equipment, the best training, and are the most committed to the Syrian government. The briefing indicates that the enemy force is a mix of ARMA and mechanised infantry, so most likely T-72s and BMP-2s. That means I really need to approach this as an anti-ARMA exercise, and the Dutch mechanised company I've got here is not exactly armed to the teeth with AT weapons. The company consists of 3 rifle platoons backed up by an anti-tank platoon with 6 GIL ATGMs mounted in Fennec recce vehicles. The GIL is what the Dutch have designated the Spike MR, which is an Israeli-designed anti-tank weapon which is kind of similar to the American Javelin. The Javelin edges the GIL out in a few important areas. The GIL lacks thermal sights and it has a 200 meter minimum range, which could potentially limit its effectiveness in an urban area like the one I'm going to be fighting in. The anti-tank weapon down at squad level is the German-made Panzerfaust 3, which consists of 110mm tandem heat rockets and a reusable launch tube equipped with a modern sighting unit. These are carried in the vehicles, and the infantry can grab about 1 launcher and 2 to 3 rockets per squad. And Panzerfaust 3 is an effective enough weapon, but apart from little HEDP grenades from the couple of AG-36 in-the-barrel launchers in each squad, that's it for AT capability. That doesn't feel like much with split squads in a dense urban environment, especially when you consider that each striker infantry squad in the original scenario can tool themselves up with a Javelin and 4 AT-4 disposable AT launchers on top of their grenade launchers. The Dutch vehicles here are certainly a step up from the striker though. 1 platoon rides to battle in Swedish CV-9035s armed with 35mm cannons, and the other 2 platoons are mounted in YPR-765 PRIs, which carry 25mm cannons. But these aren't necessarily going to cut it. Certainly they can deal with BMPs easily enough, and both cannons have armor-piercing, thin-stabilised discarding sabot rounds which can penetrate some of the weak points on the C-72s even from the front. But putting infantry fighting vehicles up against tanks is not something I want to be planning for here. It takes a fair amount of sustained fire from either of these vehicles to knock out something like the T-72, assuming that the C-72 doesn't have backup infantry support and calmly accepts its fate without shooting back. If it does shoot back, or for that matter it gets the first shot off, the later model T-72s I can expect the Republican Guard to be fielding are unlikely to miss at the short expected ranges, and it's only going to take a single shot to destroy either of the Dutch vehicles. In short then, I can't really rely on my infantry fighting vehicles to take on enemy armour. Tank hunting with small teams of pixel chopping in amongst the buildings is going to be difficult because they don't have very many AT weapons, and the ATGMs I've got have a worryingly long minimum range. On the plus side, this makes coming up with a plan pretty easy. What I want to do is destroy the enemy. I'm not too bothered about the ground objectives because once the enemy is gone, they'll be mine by default. This is a meeting engagement. Both sides will be advancing the contacts. What I want to do is get into position as fast as possible to dominate the ground the enemy is going to be advancing through. I can set up on the edges of the town to cover the long straight streets that the enemy is going to move down or cross in order to close with me. My main concern is any tanks the Syrians are bringing along, so I'm setting up the GILs to cover the streets with the infantry and their fighting vehicles nearby to deal with any enemy infantry. I'm sending one YPR platoon left to support the guilds covering the riverside in the western town, and my CV90 platoon to the right to get some Enfilade fire on the main street and to back up the guilds I want eyeballing the open space on the right. My third platoon, in YPRs, is going to cover the centre to cover that off and stop the enemy from getting between my platoons and surrounding them. Hopefully, once I'm set up, I'll be able to hold off the Syrians and pick off any of their infantry or vehicles that advance until the A10 arrives. The Dutch don't operate the A10, they've got Apaches and F-16s in shock force, but they're pretty common throughout the NATO forces, and I couldn't resist bringing the Thunderbolt out. It is only equipped with a light anti-tank payload though, 2 Maverick anti-tank missiles and 250 rounds for the cannon, and it's going to take some time to call in. It's not available for the first 5 minutes, but this Dutch company doesn't have a forward air controller attached or any TRPs set up to speed up the call-in process, so it'll take an additional 8 minutes before the A10 actually gets stuck in. While the A10 is hopefully going to have an impact, from a scenario design point of view, it shouldn't be an overpowered instant win machine. Getting everything into position as fast as possible always pays off in meeting engagements, and this one is no exception. One of the guilds on the right has gotten set up and gotten a missile off at a T-72 on the other side of the river before the second turn is finished. The missile gets intercepted by a tree, but on the next turn the team gets one off that connects. The T-72s aren't alone though, and a burst of fire from a BMP kills the guild team's gunner. The survivor from that guild team manages to grab the launcher, and a few turns later he's relocated into the building next door, lugging it up the stairs and bagging himself a BMP. This position over here is a good one. We've got elevation and good fields of fire over this flank, but there's other lower buildings and a small rise just in front, so if the guild team takes any incoming fire, they can escape quite easily by running downstairs. This does, however, require the caveat that a human opponent is able to put 2 and 2 together here in a way that the AI can't. The TAC AI here can only go where the AI plan tells it to go, and can only fire on targets it clearly identifies. A human player, meanwhile, can choose to stay out of line of sight of that position, knock some holes in the buildings with area fire, or even suppress the position, move up and stage an infantry attack to clear it. My centre platoon has set up in a series of 2-storey buildings on the edge of town, and from here they can see some Syrian infantry popping up on the rooftops in the residential area objective. The Dutch infantry platoons have a lot of the heavier weapons pushed down to squad level. Each platoon has 2 marksmen armed with the international accuracy Arctic Warfare Super Magnum chambered in 338 Lapua, which is a kind of specialised weapon you'd usually find in dedicated sniper teams, and each squad has a 7.62 NATO FN mag, which again you'd usually find in dedicated machine gun squads as the M240 or GPMG with the Americans and the British respectively. This means that the Dutch infantry is pretty capable down at platoon level, out to a greater distance than units more uniformly equipped with 5.56 weapons, and it has its specialised support embedded rather than attached. In common with a lot of mechanised infantry, the squad size is restricted by the passenger capacity of their vehicles, so they have a total of 7 men. These come in a 3-man gun team centred on the FN mag, and a 4-man team armed with C7 rifles and grenade launchers. The platoon HQ is essentially another squad led by the platoon leader, so Dutch platoons are square platoons with 4 full squads instead of the more common 3-squad plus HQ team or triangular platoons that you get elsewhere. The infantry on the roofs pops back down again after a little exchange of fire, but more Syrian infantry emerges from an alleyway between the residential area and the main road. Unfortunately for them, they're coming out onto a T-junction and running directly at my left-hand platoon. An RPG team goes first and gets away with a single casualty, but the follow-up squad is quickly pinned down by machine gun fire from one of the YPRs. The YPR 765 is actually a development of the American M113, with the important addition of a 1-man turret mounting an Ehrlichen 25mm cannon and a coax MG. There is a version in Shock Force 2 with era blocks, but none of the YPRs here have any additional protection like that. This means that if the Syrian Pixel Truppen with the RPG here manages to actually hit the YPR that's shooting him up, then the YPR is going to come off badly. It is fairly long range for an RPG though, about 400 meters, and before the RPG gunner can get his eye in, he's coming under fire from his left. On my far right flank I've set up 2 CB-9035s to enfilade the main road, and they've opened up with their 35mm cannons. These Swedish CV-90s are the Dutch Army's replacement for the YPR, but in the hypothetical timeline of Shock Force 2, the Dutch haven't completed their replacement program yet, and their mechanised infantry is still predominantly carried in YPR 765. The CV-9035 is a much more modern, much more capable vehicle. Along with a higher caliber cannon, it's got thermal sight, a better fire control system, and the commander sits in the turret instead of in the hull as he does in the YPR, so he has a much less restricted view. Caught in the crossfire between the CV-90s and the YPR, which finally opens up with its cannon, the Syrian infantry literally disintegrates. This is exactly why I've taken these positions. There's a tendency for people to focus on buildings when they consider urban warfare, but the vast majority of casualties take place on the streets, which is why I've set up in the positions I have. We do have another obvious caveat here though. Despite the first team going through that alleyway coming in the fire, the AI followed it up with a full squad because it just doesn't know any better. A human opponent would likely be more careful and try and avoid making that kind of mistake. That doesn't mean that my plan to control the streets would be less effective though. I might inflict fewer casualties if the enemy makes some different choices, but I'm forcing him to react to me. If he wants to attack my left, he must cross that main road at some point and expose himself to fire from the CV-90s and the guild team I have covering it. So he either has to take the risk, take up a defensive position to cover the residential area objective, or move to attack my cut-off force. All of these options involve risk and or involve him spending valuable time loitering or reorientating in the attack area for the A10. He does have the option to push my left though. The main road slopes down near the river and the riverbank street is in defilade from my positions on the far right, meaning that the Syrians can push forward down there without being enfiladed. Just because it's not exposed to flanking fire doesn't mean it's safe though. I have another guild team sat at the end of that road and they make short work of the first T-72 that pushes down. They did lose the spot at the last moment, but the guild missiles are fire and forget, so as long as the missile has descent, it doesn't matter too much if the launch team loses sight of their target. It doesn't have a 100% success rate though. When a second T-72 rolls down the same street, the guild plows into a wall and misses completely. I feel like that miss has a lot to do with the guild's weird flight pattern versus a hull down target, but in any case, that team has to go back to its vehicle to grab some more ammo. The route isn't left uncovered while they're away because the closest stretch of road can be watched by the other left-hand guild team up in a 3-storey building, and I've pushed out a screen of Panzerfaust 3s from the infantry platoon as backup. Over on the right, the solitary guild operator up in the building is happily picking off anything he can see, this time another T-72, but soon he has to go back for more ammo as well. And while all this has been going on, I've been steadily pushing towards the South Farm objective in the centre and working my way up the West Town objective until I have a squad fairly far forward where they can gun down some of the Syrian squirters from the alleyway as they drive them past. This squad isn't overly vulnerable. The streets on either side are covered off by guilds and YPRs and they're doing valuable work by keeping the enemy out of that objective, but it's going to be good to get them some support. Speaking of which, the A10 is coming in on its first run. The first stage of the plan has paid off. The Syrians have gotten stalled where the A10 can start working on them far enough away from my forces to avoid any potential blue on blue. The Thunderbolt's 2 AGM-65 Mavericks are easily capable of taking out anything the enemy have on the field, and a BMP-2 and an unidentified target are quickly destroyed. At the same time, another T-72 has popped up on the left and crossed over onto the other side of the river. The A10 strafes it with its cannon, but that's not enough to actually stop it. It goes on to absorb one guild missile on its turret era blocks, and it takes a second missile dropping onto the hull to knock it out. The A10 returns to its orbit with about half of its cannon ammo left. It's made a solid contribution with 2 kills, and while the effectiveness of the cannon on that last T-72 was a little underwhelming, it just goes to show the limitations of the Thunderbolt in a world where its potential targets have been upgraded and developed to take it into account. With a fairly satisfying number of burning Syrian vehicles now littering the battlefield, it's time to start cautiously moving forwards. The guilds on either flank have gotten their reloads and are back in position, and my forward squad on the left has not only occupied an important 3-storey building at the end of the West Town objective, but I've reinforced them with another squad moving up by YPR. This 3-storey building is a piece of key terrain because it secures the entire West Town objective. Any Syrian infantry moving to occupy it will have to pass by and be exposed to flanking fire, and because it gives me an elevated position closer to the centre of town. I'm not being overly aggressive with them here though, because another T-72 has popped up on the left. This tank is another lucky one. The only guild team that can draw a bead on it misses and gets wiped out by a 125mm shell in return. A little shuffling about with the second guild team on the left gives them the opportunity to get a missile off too, but this one hits the T-72's main gun and doesn't knock it out. I could reasonably guess that that's a firepower kill. Gun barrels tend not to work very well when they have unanticipated extra holes in them, but I can't be sure. An attempt by the forward squad to get a Panzerfaust 3 onto the roof of their building and hit the T-72 from there doesn't go very well. There are enough Syrian pixel tripping around to make the roof an unpleasant place. Things are a bit less sticky on the right, where the Gills are racking up vehicle kills and the CB-19s are able to fire on Syrian teams popping up on the roofs near the main street. There's a bit of a moment when I make the mistake of putting too many people on a roof as I occupy the South Farm objective, and they come under fire from the 30mm cannon on the BMP-2. This causes some casualties, but the BMP-2 is quickly taken out by the AT teams on the right. Back on the left, the problem T-72 manoeuvres round to where it can start machine gunning the forward squad's building. The Dutch infantry inside aren't particularly phased by this though, and they put a Panzerfaust 3 straight through the weapon mount to knock it out. This clears the way for me to start pushing more infantry up and to start pressuring the surviving Syrian pixel tripper on the left. The A-10 also makes a reappearance and strafes the BMP-2, which marks the end of any significant enemy resistance. A couple of turns later, the AI surrenders. That makes it a total victory for me, but even without the surrender it was likely to be a major victory. I've lost 4 men dead, 2 wounded and occupied 2 out of the 3 objectives, while the Syrians have lost 46 dead and 11 wounded, with 6 T-72s and 7 BMP-2s knocked out, holding on to just 1 objective at the end. Special hats off to the lone survivor of that right-hand Guild team, who destroyed a ridiculous 2 T-72s, 2 BMP-2s and a BMP-2K command vehicle after his buddy kicked things off by knocking out the first enemy tank. This is the kind of thing you can get away with against the AI because of its severely limited decision-making capability. This doesn't make playing against the AI useless as long as you can get down into your tactical decisions to understand why what you're doing is working, understand the limitations of the AI and be able to come up with some courses of action a human opponent might take to deal with the situation. That's it for this video, a nice trip to town with the Dutch. I still have the Syrian army and unconventional factions to do, but these might take a while longer because I want to do multiplayer games to showcase them properly, and while I can crack out a fairly short battle against the AI in an afternoon, play by email against a human being takes a lot longer. So there's at least those 2 to look forward to, guys. Hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll catch you in the next video.